Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You're joining us for episode 48. I am Jaden, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Chris. And today we are going to talk about some spring training week two takeaways. We're going to continue to read into performances that don't matter at all. We're going to overanalyze those and predict that both the Reds and the Guardians will make the World Series this year because they look good in the spring. Then we're going to dive into a bit of a mailbag segment. Thank you to our lovely listener who sent us a couple questions that we're going to get into today. We've got one about the Hall of Fame, and then we've got another one where Chris and I each have to pick a new team to cheer for. So those will be interesting, exciting discussions. But Chris, how are you doing?
I'm good. I think it's funny that you said listener without the plural. I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more engagement from the fans, but I digress. Anyway, I'm good. I think that I'm going to stop saying positive stuff about the Guardians though on this program because they have lost 8 of their last 9 since we last checked in, and they were undefeated this time last week. So. But
Yeah,
in all seriousness, I'm not really reading into anything that happens in the game as far as winning and losing. But um yeah, it's been an interesting week for sure. It's definitely some important takeaways from the week. So
yeah,
um
no, I get that. I get not wanting to talk positive about your club on this program. I had to, if you'll recall back with me, I had to stop doing that towards the end of last season with the Reds, to help them make the playoffs. I sort of stopped praising them there for a second, and I actually had like an Ellie De La Cruz segment on here, because I worked on the outline a little bit before they played their game yesterday, and he was he's still playing really well this spring, but he went 0 for 3 yesterday. And so I decided to take it off the outline to help him continue to perform well. So I won't get into any LA talk, but I will go ahead and dive into my Reds takeaways from this last week. The first one being Rhett Lauder. I am going to praise him because I said he was doing well last week, and then he came out this week and threw 3 hitless innings against the Angels. So apparently when I talk good about Rhett Lauder, good things happen for him. So until that um, proves not to be the case, I'm going to continue to do it, I guess. He did walk one, but whatever. The location and movement both looked really good on his pitches, according to the people who are in the organization watching the games, things like that. He really continues to make his case to be in the opening day rotation. I just I wonder if they're going to do it because he missed a whole year last year. I think it'll be interesting to see, but um, he's definitely had a really good start to his spring. Hunter Green, on the other hand, had a pretty poor start to his spring. He threw a yes hitter in his spring training debut against the Brewers. He gave up 4 runs in the first inning and was pulled before he recorded an out. Now, because it's spring training and these games don't matter, pitchers are allowed to come back in after they get pulled. So he came back out for the second inning, and he did get out of that one scoreless. So, one really bad inning, one pretty good inning. I covered it last year as well. For whatever reason, he seems to struggle in Arizona. Maybe it's because the breaking stuff doesn't work as well, so he's got to rely more on the fastball. He can't use that slider so much. He also said that he was working on adjusting to ABS, and that was like um affecting where he was putting his pitches. So maybe that was some of it too. Spring is a time for a lot of these pitchers to work on different things, work on new pitches. Hunter's also working on a new pitch, a two-seamer. So, maybe he was experimenting with that a little bit. And when these pitchers experiment in the spring and they can't throw the breaking ball the way they want to because of the air in Arizona, it can lead to some inflated numbers for some guys. And with Hunter Green, I don't really care where the spring numbers end up because they have never been good once in his career. And I think the past 2 years, he's proven that past 3 years, really, since 2023, that in spite of what his spring numbers may end up as, he's a guy that's a bona fide ace in this league, and he could have an ERA of 7 in the Cactus League, and I don't think it would matter too much. Continuing the theme with pitchers, our new bullpen arms have continued to make some appearances, and they've all looked really good. Pierce Johnson, he as of before yesterday's game, he had thrown 2 innings. He has a 0 ERA. three strikeouts and no walks. Caleb Ferguson had only thrown one inning prior to yesterday's game, also with a 0 ERA, one strikeout and one walk. And then Brock Burke had thrown 3 innings, 3 ERA, only one of those runs was earned over the two that contributed to that 3 ERA. And four strikeouts to one walk. And obviously, these sample sizes are about as small as they can be, but all of these guys look really good. I'm really excited for them to be in this bullpen. And I think knowing that all these guys look good is a big plus because a lot of the younger guys are struggling. Guys like Luis May, Zach Maxwell, um, Connor Phillips to some extent. They're really struggling in these early games, and that takes a lot of stress off of this bullpen, having those young guys, or not having to rely on those young guys and having these veterans in the bullpen that they can sort of rely on a little bit more, and they don't have to, Luis May doesn't have to be ready to go on opening day. If he's not ready, if he can't figure out the walks, it doesn't matter because we've got Pierce Johnson and Caleb Ferguson and Brock Burke who are reliable and who can cover those innings. So, I feel really good about this bullpen. I know I've said it pretty much all off season, but I really like what this team has done with the bullpen. I think it's going to be one of the more reliable bullpens we've seen in Cincinnati in quite a while. Um, and then lastly, Matt McLain had a huge day yesterday. I did want to cover that. Um, I know that it doesn't really matter a ton because he started really hot last spring and then cooled down quite a bit. And obviously, he had a bad season, but I'm really hoping that this is a sign of good things to come this year. He homered twice yesterday against the Cubs, once to left center and once to right center, and they were not cheap. I think one went 412 feet and one went 421 feet or something like that. Both had exit velocities over 100 miles an hour. So they were both really well hit balls. They were both over, or they were both on, hanging breaking stuff. So take that with a grain of salt. He's probably not going to see as many of those pitches when the season actually starts, but it's good to see him tap into his power. He's a 571 average with an OPS of 1.933 across the spring so far, with one strikeout to three walks. Um, I don't know. It feels like this needs to be covered because he's playing so well in the spring, but at the same time, um, I struggle to like really give any insight on it because it doesn't matter. Some of this is against guys who are probably never going to pitch in the big leagues. Some of it is against guys who are big league pitchers, but like I said with Hunter Green, maybe they can't throw their breaking stuff. Maybe they're working on new pitches, working on trying to locate something that specific day. So, it's nice to see Matt McLain playing well, and you really hope that he can continue to play well once the regular season arrives, but you can't really read into it too much other than say, hey, Matt McLain's playing well recently. Um, but that's all I've got for the Reds. I think it was a good week for the Reds. I think they showed quite a bit of fight too, which was nice. They were behind early in quite a few games last week, and they came back to win um, most of those games. So, like I said, it's exhibition, and you're playing against like seventh stringers in the ninth inning. So, how impressive is a comeback, really? But um, I think it speaks to, if nothing else, it speaks to the culture in the clubhouse. Even in the spring, they want to fight to win these games, and they're not going to go down without a fight, even in spring training. And I think, if nothing else, that's a good thing to take away from it.
Yeah, it's really tough to read really anything into spring training, not only because mainly because the games are not, most of the games are not televised, and even some of the games are not even on the radio. So you got to rely on, you got to watch the box score like a hawk. And, both of us have jobs, so we can't really watch the box score 24/7 and, pay that close of attention. So it kind of adds another layer to like how much of a grain of salt you have to take with things. And you can only really read into things when it's televised because the biggest thing that spring training kind of shows is at bat quality. Like that's the biggest thing that you could take away from spring training. And but there were some really interesting things that happened this week, nonetheless. Rhys Hoskins made his debut. As of yesterday, I'm not sure if he played today against the Dodgers or not. Guardians lost 5-4 against the Dodgers, even though Kyle Manzardo hit a grand slam. That's another conversation. But um, anyway, Rhys Hoskins, as of yesterday, was 1 for 6 in spring training. He made his debut last Friday, so I think it's like the 27th or something. Um, like I said, I'm not going to really read into his stats at all, but if he's healthy at the end of spring training, I think he's a shoe-in to make their opening day roster. I think also with his age, he's 32 years old, and he's on a brand new team that that kind of adds another layer to how irrelevant his spring training stats are, but it's good to see Reese Hoskins in a Cleveland uniform. Hopefully he stays healthy through opening day, which I'm sure he will. The next guy is that I want to talk about is Chase DeLauder, and he had a health scare earlier last week. He was scratched from the lineup last minute with quote unquote lower body soreness, which the Guardians claim this was precautionary, and I have every reason to believe them because a couple of days later he came back and he he hit a home run and a double. He went 2 for 2, and then he got pulled out of that game. So there's no denying how impressive Chase DeLauder is when he's on the field. It's just a matter of can he stay on the field? And it's a little concerning to me that he is getting sidelined, like he gets scratched last minute from a lineup after he only played a few games in spring training. That is just not a good sign to me. And it doesn't make me really feel any better about his longevity this season. But I think the Guardians are going to have no choice but to put him in a platoon role in right field or something this year. Have him platoon with David Fry or like Nolan Jones or Angel Martinez or Daniel Schneemann or somebody like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach Chase Slaughter's playing time, and I think the Guardians, assuming that he's not on the injured list, they do have just enough depth to where they could kind of play around with his playing time and not have to rely on him every day. But it would be nice if obviously if DeLauder can be kind of a centerpiece in that lineup because he's every bit as talented enough to be everyday middle of the order guy, but just doesn't have the health to hold it up yet. Um, Another guy that this is probably the most interesting thing to me from this past week was Daniel Espino made his debut. Now, if you don't know who Daniel Espino is, he has never pitched in a big league game, but he was a former top prospect in the Guardians organization. I think he about 4 years ago, he peaked at like the number 18 prospect or something in baseball. I'm just kind of going off the dome there, but he made his spring training debut and he came back into professional baseball at the very end of last year after about 3.5 years off. The last time that he pitched in a professional game, which was in Double A, was I think like April 26th of 2022, and he came back September of last year. So it was 3.5 years completely off of pitching in a professional game. He had a couple of shoulder surgeries and just some very serious injuries, but he pitched a scoreless 9 pitch inning against the Diamondbacks on Sunday. I really wish that that game was televised, but I understand why it wasn't because it was a split squad game, and Jose Ramirez and Gavin Williams were in the other game. So I mean, I understand why the other game was not televised, but it would have been really cool to see Daniel Spino on TV and along with that, there was no radio coverage of that ball game. So there's no footage of Espino pitching, but it's super exciting that he is building up, albeit slowly. But I think that he can be um, a piece in this bullpen by midseason, assuming that he stays with his progression. He averaged 96.8 miles per hour with his fastball, and he topped out around 98 when he was fully healthy about 4 years ago, he was throwing 98 to 100 typically. He's been compared to Jacob deGrom in the past. His stuff is that good. Um, and the Diamondbacks were had a pretty decent lineup on Sunday. He got Alec Thomas out, who's a full-time big leaguer. He got a couple of quad A guys out as well. It was 1, 2, 3 innings. Um, so that's all on Daniel Spino. I'm super excited about him. And then another thing that happened this week, or that I noticed at least, is that David Fry is back behind the plate. He's catching a little bit. And in the game that I watched on Sunday against the Rockies, he was behind the plate and he won an ABS challenge. So, he has he's really he really seems to be with it behind the plate. Seems like he really didn't miss a beat, even though he didn't catch it all last year. There was a lot of talk last year that David Fry was still sitting in on every single catcher's meeting and, keeping up with all the homework and stuff on hitters, like doing all the background work despite not catching. So he's really staying on top of his game, and it really showed in spring training. He also threw a guy out. He's coming back from Tommy John surgery, so that was huge to see. The throw looked really strong and it was super accurate, and he also really looked really good framing behind the plate. So um, I definitely have high hopes for David Fry's defensive versatility this season. And, just the fact that his arm looked good behind the plate on Sunday, that gives me a lot of confidence that he'll be able to play a little bit of right field. Um, his range leaves a lot to be desired in the outfield, but I think his arm, he does just enough with his glove and with his range, but his arm can definitely be a good asset there in right field. So, um, couple utility guys. I haven't really touched on these guys at all, at least this year on the podcast. So um, these are kind of takeaways that I noticed from that Sunday game as well. Tom Hamilton was talking about how Daniel Schneemann bulked up this winter, and he swung the bat really well this spring. I don't have his stats written down at all, and quite frankly, I think his stats are kind of irrelevant. But um, Tom Hamilton was saying that he's put together really good at bats, and he looked really good at the plate on Sunday. I think Daniel Schneemann is one of the more underrated guys on the team. He's just a guy that, he doesn't do anything exceedingly, he doesn't really excel at anything that much, but he also doesn't really have any weaknesses in his game. Like he's just kind of good at everything. And I think with the added strength, that can really bring him to the next level of a utility guy having a little bit more pop in his bat. And I think it's kind of a trendy thing too that a lot of guys have kind of bulked up this offseason because these younger guys in MLB with not a whole lot of experience, they kind of realize how hard playing 162 games is on your body. And if you don't have the muscle mass to back it up, your muscles are going to break down, your body's going to break down. So having a little bit of extra muscle, like not necessarily for the power aspect, but just for the durability aspect is huge. So um, another guy who looks a little bit bigger to me is Angel Martinez. I haven't gotten any confirmation, but he's another guy who swung the bat extremely well this spring. Now, I'm a little bit more cautiously optimistic about Angel Martinez because his entire career he's been a very, very streaky hitter. Um, Daniel Schneemann is a lot more consistent of a hitter, and this is really nothing new from Angel Martinez. We've seen flashes of the player that he could be. He's like I said, he's gotten really hot for certain stretches. Um, but I'm gonna need to see more from him this season. I think that he could be a huge part of this team, and I think that he should be, considering that he's that second utility guy on the team. And he's homered in two consecutive games, or at least he homered Saturday and Sunday in those ball games. So I'm not sure if he played today, but yeah, he's been swinging the bat really well. It'll definitely be interesting to see what Stephen Vogt does with this roster. Both Angel Martinez and Daniel Schneemann are healthy at the moment, and with the addition of Chase DeLauder and George Valera and Nolan Jones, it'll be very interesting to see how this roster shakes out, especially with the addition of Reese Hoskins. So, um, last guy I kind of want to talk about is Slade Cecconi. Now, this is kind of credit to Locked On Guardians guys who were talking about him this morning. They were talking about how he kind of changed his arsenal up a lot, and I like that. His fastball has always been kind of a weak point for him. Um, Apparently, he's been throwing almost a third of the time this spring. He has been throwing his cutter, which his fastball, he was very fastball heavy last year. And he apparently this spring he's almost ditched his four seam. So he's also throwing a little bit more of a sweeper as opposed to a slider for kind of a secondary pitch. He's still throwing, I think he's still throwing that big looping curveball, and that was a good pitch for him, about 70 miles an hour and a good change of pace from his 96 mile an hour fastball. But having a little bit more movement on all of his pitches, I think, will be a benefit to him. So, Slade Cecconi is a guy who um, I haven't really talked about this year. I feel like he's just one of those guys that is, he, I think he kind of overperformed a little bit last year, and I think he's still due for a little bit of regression, but he's going to be one of those guys that is, I think he's pretty much guaranteed to make the roster. I don't think he's really on the bubble as far as the rotation goes, but um, he's a guy that the Guardians really need to step up this year. So um, definitely a good sign that he's changed his arsenal up a little bit. So that's all I have for the Guardians.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you talk about guys that are streaky, like an Angel Martinez or um, like a Will Benson comes to mind for the Reds, it's really hard. It's hard to read into anyone's spring. It's incredible. It's almost impossible to read into the spring that those guys are having because um, you already know that they have a track record of being streaky. Um, and in the spring, that I think just gets highlighted even more. So it's hard to really know what those guys are going to be coming out of the spring with a guy who's with a guy like a Jose Ramirez or something like that. You don't worry where his spring training stats end up, and then you've got these streaky guys where you want to worry a little bit more where their spring training stats end up, but it's almost impossible to make any sense of them because of how streaky they are. It's tough. I think, yeah, for a team like the Guardians, Angel Martinez probably will make the opening day roster. I don't see a world where he's not on the opening day roster. I think it's a little more interesting for Will Benson, just given where the Reds are with kind of their left-handed bench options, like JJ Bleday, Nathaniel Lowe. Um, so it's just more of a roster construction thing, really more than anything. But yeah, it's it's hard to make these sort of calls when we've seen 2 weeks of spring training baseball. But enough of trying to make any sense of it. Let's get into our mailbag segment here. So the first question we got is there anyone that we think deserves to be in the Hall of Fame that isn't, and vice versa? So anyone who is in the Hall of Fame that we think shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. So for my non-deserving one, I kind of went with the standard answer, the one that I think a lot of people who follow baseball or know a lot of baseball are going to give you, and that's Phil Rizzuto. He's I had a really hard time coming up with people who shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, um, based on who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. Like I was looking at I think it was Bob Lemon's baseball reference page, and I was like, oh, should does he really deserve to be in there? And then I was like, well, let me compare him to like Felix Hernandez because I think it's probably a little bit of bias because I watched Felix growing up and I liked him, but like I think Felix probably should be in the Hall of Fame, and he has comparable stats to a Bob Lemon, so if I think Felix should be in, Bob Lemon should be in. And I do think that, people complain that the Baseball Hall of Fame is sort of the standards have shifted and it's getting watered down, but it's still probably the most exclusive Hall of Fame in Big Four professional sports, at least in the US. I think it's probably still the hardest to get into. But yeah, Phil Rizzuto, I think a lot of people are going to give you that answer if you ask them this question. He is a one-time MVP in 1950 at a career OPS plus of 93, and he only averaged 4.1 WAR um, per 162 games across his career. He never led the league in any really meaningful stats aside from WAR in 1950 when he won the MVP, and they weren't using WAR back then. Um, that's a new age stat, so they couldn't have even justified his MVP with WAR when he won it in 1950. He was a Yankee, so that probably had a lot to do with it. He was a 1950s Yankee, so when it came time for Hall of Fame voting, that probably had a lot to do with it. I don't really know what the defense looked like. I mean, it's maybe his glove was really good, and you can make an argument based on that, but you would think that the WAR would be higher if his defense was that good. Um, I don't really know why he's in the Hall of Fame. Um, I guess Baseball Reference likes his defense quite a bit. But like they didn't have that back then. So, maybe they were just basing it on the eye test and the fact he was a career Yankee. Um, I don't really know. But yeah, Phil Rizzuto's my answer for a guy who's in the Hall of Fame that maybe shouldn't be. Um, Now, for my guy who's not in the Hall of Fame, who should be, um, I think Kenny Lofton should be in the Hall of Fame, but I think kind of with Phil Rizzuto, that's like the standard answer is, oh, Kenny Lofton should be in the Hall of Fame. So I wanted to dig a little deeper and pick a guy who maybe a lot of people wouldn't say. So I went with George Foster. He obviously there's some Reds bias here, but he was a crucial member of the Big Red Machine. Um, and I do think there's a decent argument for him getting in with Dave Parker being voted in by the Veterans Committee. Foster put up four more WAR and 489 less games than Dave Parker. His career slug was better than Parker, but the average was quite a bit lower. George Foster was a one-time MVP and a five-time All-Star. Dave Parker was a one-time MVP and seven-time All-Star, so he hasn't beaten All-Stars. Now, Dave Parker did win two batting titles, three Gold Gloves, and three Silver Sluggers, where George Foster only has the one Silver Slugger. So I think that could hurt his case when you kind of try to hold him up to that um, Dave Parker standard. Um, but I think, George Foster winning two World Series with the Big Red Machine, having a 54 homer season in 1977 when he won the MVP. Guys weren't really hitting home runs like that um, back in those days. So, I think that you could make an argument that should get him in 52 home runs. He led the league in home runs in back-to-back years, 77 and 78. Yeah, I think there's an argument for George Foster with Dave Parker getting in. That's my guy that I think, you know, that I'm at least making an argument for when it comes time. I also think, Barry Bonds, you could make an argument for Barry Bonds. Despite the steroid thing, I think it's time that the MLB just accepts that the steroid era was a thing. They let it happen because it was good for viewership and good for ratings and things like that. Um, and, acknowledge that these guys deserve to be honored. I mean, Pete Rose, for as flawed as he was as a person, um, we talked about it. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and they waited until he died to say, yeah, we'll let him in the Hall of Fame. I think it would be a disservice to do the same thing to Barry Bonds, in spite of the steroids and all of that. I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But for my guy with like no checkered past and um, not as clear a case as Kenny Lofton, I'm going George Foster.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of a Hall of Fame is kind of flawed, because there's a lot of gray area in terms of like what a person does in their life and what kind of constitutes getting in versus not getting in. Like if they, if they get popped for steroids or something, then that's, they're most likely not going to get in. But if they took steroids throughout their career and went undetected, then they're going to make the Hall of Fame. Like, it's and then there's guys like Marcell Ozuna is not going to be like a Hall of Fame caliber player, but it's as if he hasn't done anything off the field that is like uh, worse than getting popped for steroids. Like I think that Marcell Ozuna is, he's a bad person. These guys that get popped for steroids are not inherently bad people. I that might be kind of a hot take, but um, yeah, enough of that. I agree. It was really hard to find people that were in the Hall of Fame that didn't deserve to be there. There were a lot of guys that kind of in the era of like 1940 to 1950 got inducted into the Hall of Fame that I had never heard of. There were a lot of guys, so like honestly, I'm really bad about knowing players that played before 2000. I know a lot of players that played after 2000. Probably more than I should. But before 2000 is a complete blind spot for me. So this is a guy I never heard of that is in the Hall of Fame, but his name is Pie Trainer. He played between 1920 and 1937. Um, he had a 17-year career. He had 38.7 career wins above replacement, so he averaged 3.2 wins above replacement per 162 games. So it's a little bit less WAR than Jaden's player, Phil Rizzuto. But the thing that I think got him into the Hall of Fame was he had a career batting average of 320 and home runs in his career. Um, but home runs weren't really a thing that was celebrated back then. So um, he also walked 472 times in his career and only struck out 272 times in 17 seasons. So that is insane. Um, but he kind of gives me like a Luis Arraez vibes, except like a little bit more in the extreme, like a little bit higher ceiling, a little bit longer of a peak than Luis Arraez, but I don't know. His also his career OPS plus was 107, so he was a little bit above average throughout his whole career offensively. Um, the highest MVP vote he got throughout his career was, I believe, sixth place. So he didn't have like he was just always kind of like a really good player. I don't know. He's kind of fringe. The guy that actually is pretty comparable to him as far as wins above replacement goes is Carlos Santana. And I don't think that Carlos Santana is going to get into the Hall of Fame. I think that he doesn't have quite enough, at least ceiling wise. Like Santana has had a really good career. He's had a really long uh, like period of time where he was a good player, but he just didn't really have that ceiling. I see Santana as a pretty comfortable player as far as like player quality goes. Um, so I don't know. That's kind of a fringe player that I found. Um, Now there's a lot of guys that you could pick from that deserve to be in the Hall of Fame that were not. And one of those guys is this is a pretty obvious pick, but Manny Ramirez. I mean, this is one of the best players in the steroid era. I don't believe that he ever got caught for steroids. But if I'd have to venture a guess, I would imagine he was taking steroids at some point in his career. Um, but he was a 12-time All-Star, a 9-time Silver Slugger, and a 2-time World Series champ. He had 69.3 career wins above replacement. He played 19 seasons. He averaged 4.9 WAR per 162 games. He had 555 career home runs. He had a 312 career batting average and a 154 career OPS plus. Um, I think the reason that Manny Ramirez is not in the Hall of Fame is because he had a pretty bad relationship with the media. Um, Kind of like it's kind of similar to Barry Bonds, except Barry Bonds has the extra layer of, getting caught for steroids.
Chris, I do want to
So
butt in. Manny Ramirez got popped for steroids twice in
did
his
he?
career. Yeah,
Oh, well,
yeah.
yeah, that yeah.
But I mean,
That answers that question.
yeah. Um, I I don't, kind of like with Bonds, I think, these guys that played in this era. I mean, Frank Thomas is in the Hall of Fame. You look me in the eyes and tell me Frank Thomas was not on steroids. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, you can't get that big.
Yeah, he does a commercial for testosterone supplements now. He was on steroids in his career. He just never got caught, and he's in the Hall of Fame. These guys like Manny Ramirez, these guys like Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, they made the mistake of,
Jim Thome is in the Hall of Fame.
yeah,
There's
he
no way
was
that Jim Thome wasn't on
definitely
steroids.
juiced.
Yeah.
I, the Manny Ramirez, Barry Bonds, they made the mistake of getting caught. That's the only mistake they made in their career
Yeah.
that Frank Thomas and Jim Thome and, um, you know, a lot of other guys made, I'm sure. I mean, there were pitchers. Is Clemens in the Hall? Or he's not in, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, I don't think they like him.
No, they don't.
But yeah, I don't know. Like, there are guys in the Hall of Fame that were on steroids,
Justin Verlander is going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's never gotten caught for steroids. So
right? Yeah, I
there's no way that you're 43 years old and you could still throw 97 miles an hour after playing 20 seasons and being above average for the entirety of your career. There's no
yeah,
way.
I I just the steroids thing is kind of it's it's a it's a bad argument to try and make because I think you're kidding yourself if you say there aren't guys in the Hall of Fame that were using steroid or everyone in the Hall of Fame was clean. Todd Helton, Larry Walker, um, those are guys that have been in recent. David Ortiz probably was using
Oh
steroids.
yeah.
Um,
You can't get that big naturally.
yeah, so I don't know. I think it's a silly argument to try and make that um, you know these guys shouldn't be in because they use steroids. They just got caught using steroids. But yeah, enough of that. We've said our piece. We'll get into our last question here, and this is what we'll use to close out the show. If we had to pick a new team to support, and this is a hypothetical situation where both the Reds and the Guardians disappeared overnight as if they had never existed. So, um, we didn't. The Reds were never a franchise. The Guardians were never a franchise. I would come into my little office space here, and all of my Reds memorabilia would be gone, and I wouldn't be any the wiser. Who would we pick and why would we pick that team? I think we both picked two teams, so I'll get into mine real quick. We have a shared one too, so that would be good for the podcast. I think we could do a more cohesive podcast maybe. But I started with the Mariners. Uh, you know, uh, they just have a lot of trade history with the Reds. A lot of Mariners guys have been Reds, and a lot of Reds guys have been Mariners, and they've all really been likable players. So, it's easy to support them when they're on the Mariners. And so that kind of leads to you rooting for the Mariners. But in this hypothetical, those guys never would have been Reds. So that I didn't put that in my argument. But overall, just, you know, trying to ignore that, I think the Mariners are a likable franchise. They're a likable team, and they have a really likable fan base. I think Mariners fans they're well regarded by me, and I think they're generally well regarded by um, people who follow baseball. You know, it also doesn't hurt that they're consistently pumping out some of the coolest uniforms in the MLB. Their City Connects are awesome. They're doing a thing this year where I think every Friday home game or something like that, they're wearing an uh, I think it's the Steelheads alternate uniform to honor the Negro League team that was in Seattle. So, that's really cool, and it's a really cool uniform. Seattle teams are just really good at uniforms, and that I think adds to their likability quite a bit if you're trying to pick a team to root for. They've also seen some recent success, but they still have never won a World Series. So I think it would be fun to cheer for them as they try and hunt down that first World Series title. They have a history of great players, guys like Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson, Edgar Martinez, Ichiro, King Felix. And then, now they've got Julio and Josh Naylor and Cal Raleigh. So yeah, I think I would find it pretty easy to root for the Mariners. My other pick is the Giants. So I've got two West Coast teams on here. I'd be staying up pretty late to watch the games, or I'd have to move out west. But it wouldn't be as easy to watch the
Move
games
out
as
west
it
to
is.
watch baseball.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put it past me, knowing myself. But I really like Oracle Park. I think it's a really cool park. McCovey Cove is maybe one of my favorite features in all of baseball when it comes to like, unique park things. I think McCovey Cove is a really awesome thing. And they were like the good guy dynasty when we were growing up. I don't remember really ever hating them, even though they won three titles from 2010 to 2014. And one of those times they knocked the Reds out of the playoffs. And I still can't remember really ever like being like, oh man, I don't like the Giants. And maybe that's because I was young too, but you know, I I don't ever remember hating them. I really liked Tim Lincecum growing up. He was, one of my favorite non-Reds players when I was growing up. Currently I'm a huge Logan Webb guy. He's always my ace. I always try to get him in fantasy baseball as my ace. I also really like Elliot Ramos. I think he's gonna blossom into a really good player. Um, and we might be the most pro Hayden Birdsong podcast out there. So, um, I'd be I'd if I wake up in this world, first thing I'm doing is uh getting on the MLB shop website and making sure I've got a Hayden Birdsong jersey coming my way. Um I also like their new manager. He seems like a pretty cool guy coming from the college scene. And then lastly, their mascot is a seal, and I'm a huge seal guy. I think seals are really cool, kind of the dogs of the ocean. So, it doesn't hurt that their mascot is awesome too. But yeah, I'd be a Mariners or Giants fan, and this podcast would probably look way different.
Yeah, I absolutely hated the Giants growing up. I'm gonna be honest. I was one of those kids that hated any team that was good.
That's fair.
So that was the reason I hated the Giants. But at the same time, though, I absolutely love Tim Lincecum.
Yeah.
He really resonated with me as a kid because he was like small and he still threw the ball at 98 miles an hour, and I loved his mechanics, and I thought his long hair was cool. So. Um, I loved playing with him in MLB 2K9. Um, but yeah, I've everybody else on Giants I absolutely hated. But I don't dislike the Giants anymore. I think they're a likable team, but I don't know. I'm kind of indifferent to the Giants. Um, yeah, another team that I would cheer for is also the Mariners. I love their color scheme. I love the Pacific Northwest. They're always a team that has been an underdog, and they've never made a World Series. And I just kind of have a soft spot for those teams that, being a Cleveland sports fan, I feel like I'm obligated to cheer for teams that haven't had um, si consistent success. So that's kind of a reason why I gravitate towards Seattle, but. They're a team unlike the Guardians that actually has spent money recently, and they actually like put a little bit of effort into making their team good, whereas, the Guardians just the Guardians have a good farm system, and they just kind of ride off of that. They don't really do anything in free agency, but the Mariners actually spend a little bit of money, um, and they have likable players. I'm a huge Josh Naylor fan. Um, I'll be honest, I think I was wrong about Josh Naylor. I didn't really like his long-term trajectory, but he seems to have really stayed healthy, and he's an all-star caliber player with them. I think he's going to be an all-star caliber player his whole time with Seattle. Um, Yeah, they're just Julio Rodriguez is likable. He's one of those likable superstars that's in baseball. He's not like, I don't like Juan Soto. Something about Juan Soto just rubs me the wrong way. Julio's cool. Cal Raleigh is very likable. I like Brian Wu. Um, their whole pitching staff really is pretty likable. So Seattle Mariners is a team that I would definitely cheer for. Another team I cheer for is the Toronto Blue Jays, and kind of similar to Jaden, they have a lot of former Guardians players. Um, I love Ernie Clement. I'm a huge Shane Bieber guy as well. I wasn't crazy about Miles Straw when he was a Guardian, but he's a former Guardian, so and he has randomly become a pretty good player with them. So, but Blue Jays fans are super loyal and passionate, which is another reason that I think I would cheer for the Blue Jays. They have a really fun environment, like in their stadium. Like I always remember growing up, I'd see like um that Jose Bautista home run in the playoffs. Like it's just that's a top 10 aura moment. Like he just and then you have the foghorn that plays after every home run. I think that's so cool. I wish more teams did that. Like a cool stadium celebration thing after somebody hits a home run. But I've also been to Rogers Center before. It's a really cool ballpark, and I love the walkability of the surrounding area. I'm a huge walkable city guy. Um, and the view of the Sky Needle when the roof is open, the view of the Sky Needle is phenomenal. So I was lucky enough to be at Rogers Center on like a perfect weather day. So the roof was open. And yeah, kind of similar to the Mariners, the Blue Jays also spend money on their team and are pretty likable. I've never been a huge George Springer guy because he played for the Astros, but overall they have a lot of super likable players. So um, Mariners and Blue Jays for me. I really enjoyed watching the ALCS last year.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'm glad we don't live in that world. I'm glad to be a Reds fan for as much as I try and complain about how they don't spend money and never perform up to expectations. I think it's nice to have a team that you're geographically close to and that you sort of root for along with your family. I think that's nice. And I think if we didn't have the Reds and the Guardians, we might not get that. Um, but yeah, that's enough talk about being fans of different teams. We're Reds and Guardians fans through and through here. And next week, we're going to come at you again with more overanalyzing of spring training stats. And who knows, maybe we'll find something else to cover next week. But that's it for episode 48. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment, leave a like, leave a review, subscribe on YouTube, all that fun stuff. If you missed the mailbag segment last week, but you have a question, send one in. Um, we're kind of, we don't want to cover all spring training baseball, so give us something else to cover if you got a question or something, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, treat it as a revolving door of mailbag segments. Whenever you have a question, send it our way and we'll cover it. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Thanks so much. See ya.